So thanks everyone for being here tonight. I'm Alex Brown. I'm a new face on the screen, I imagine, for most of you. I have been getting caught up by Beth the last couple months so that I could take over as the coordinator for the Montana Native Plant Society Presents series, and I'm so happy to be here with you all today. A little bit about me. This is definitely not a program about
Why
me.
is my volume not working?
Oh,
Um, oh, she's muted. Muted.
I'm muted. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay.
Wait, no,
Yes,
she's not
that's a
muted,
yes.
and I still can't hear her.
Everyone else can stay muted. All right. Thanks for bearing with me. Um, so I'm Alex Brown. I'm a new face here with MNPS Presents. Beth Madden has been very kindly keeping me up to getting me up to speed over the last couple months so that I could take over as the speaker coordinator for this series. And just a little bit about me. I am currently working for the Missoula County Department of Ecology and Extension as the program development coordinator for the new Rocky Mountain Gardens. So any plant enthusiasts, as I'm sure you all are, who are in the area, should stop by the Rocky Mountain Gardens if you haven't already. But I grew up in Missoula. I went to the University of Montana, studied environmental studies and sociology. And I've always spent a lot of time in the woods. And it's, as I'm sure many of you agree, a very difficult thing to not become a plant nerd when you do that. So I'm so excited to listen and learn with you all this season. And I'm just thrilled to be here. Again, just a bit of housekeeping. If you can keep your microphones muted, I will do that too once I hand over the reins to our speaker for the evening. You can have your video on, it's optional. And the big thing is if you can enter your questions into the chat. My chat prompt is currently at the top of my screen, but it might be at the bottom of your screen, just depending on how your Zoom is set up. But if you enter your questions into the chat, we will do our best to answer them throughout or to answer them at the end. So we do anticipate having some time at the end to go through those questions we missed and potentially have time for more. So with that, the other thing I want you all to know is that we are recording this program. And so just so you're aware that this will be available online after tonight's program. So this program is part of our Montana Native Plant Society Presents series. This season, we plan to have a monthly program on the second Tuesday of each month, October through March. As I mentioned, you can watch past programs both on our website or on our YouTube channel. Also, for the members in the audience, we're so happy to have you. And if you are not yet a member, you can join today by going to montananativeplants.org/membership. And that membership supports events like tonight's program and all the other amazing work that the Montana Native Plant Society does throughout the state. So I highly encourage you to join. You also get an awesome newsletter and invites to super fun plant events. So I'm going to introduce Wendy Velman, who is our speaker tonight. We're so lucky to have her with us. Wendy is the Botany Program Lead for the Montana and Dakota Bureau of Land Management. She graduated with a bachelor's in botany from Idaho State University, after which she started her career in federal service as a biological technician for the Bureau of Land Management in Cottonwood, Idaho. She held seasonal and term positions across Idaho's BLM offices until she was hired as a natural resource specialist in Idaho Falls in 2004. In 2011, Wendy moved to the Montana Dakotas State Office as the Botany Program Lead. And being part of the BLM plant conservation and restoration for the past 25 years has built in Wendy a passion for bringing back native landscapes to their original diversity. She is a lifetime member of the Montana Native Plant Society and enjoys educating others about the amazing plant life in Montana or talking about anything botany or pollinator related. She lives on the plains of Montana with her husband, her 3 children, 3 dogs, 16 chickens, and a large population of cats. So, Wendy, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And we're thrilled to have you. Thanks for coming and chatting with us.
Thanks for the invite. Good evening, everyone.
All right. And sorry, Wendy, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop sharing now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. All right.
My turn.
Yes.
Now, if I can get it to go, right?
Yes.
All right, let's see if we can get this. Tell me if it's working correctly.
Yep, it looks great.
All right, good.
All right, I'm going to mute my phone now.
Okay, so I do have to do something really quick with my other thing because my camera's kind of a different angle. That way I'm not like acting like I'm looking somewhere else. So good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to be here and kind of excited to be able to update everyone on what BLM Montana Dakotas has been up to. Some of you may have heard a little bit of this if you were at the Plant Conservation Conference this past summer, May, whenever that was, March, April, whenever we had that meeting. But hopefully I've got some new good information here to share with everybody also. So the National Native Seed Strategy was established in 2015. It was published and activated across the Plant Conservation Alliance. That includes 12 federal partners, 350 non-federal partners, and 9 international partners. And of those 350, there are 7 Montana organizations that are part of that, and the Native Plant Society is one of the primary ones. So once the National Seed Strategy came out in 2015, BLM and a lot of other federal agencies kind of got to work figuring out how to implement the strategy. And in 2020, we had a back up. We had before that in 2015 and 2016, they put together a business plan for the National Seed Strategy. And it was to try to help identify the roles that each of the different partners within that Plant Conservation Alliance could participate. So after 5 years of the plan working, in 2020, we did a 5-year report on it. And in that 5-year report, we found that there were not a lot of things implemented that we were all hoping for. And so BLM and part of the Plant Conservation Alliance, they hired the National Academy of Science to do a review of that 5-year report and to also investigate what the holdups or the issues were on why some of these other parts of the strategy were not being implemented. So that published, the National Science Academy published that in January of 2023, and they actually had a presentation at the National Native Seed Conference that we had in Washington, D.C. in 2023. And so because of that, the BLM and other federal agencies, there was identified information that each entity within this plant conservation strategy should be working towards and could re-implement or implement in a better way to make the strategy more more visible and more active. And so within the seed strategy itself, I have these 3 goals up here. And each one of the green objectives highlighted are the ones that our Montana Dakotas BLM has been participating in different different partnerships in different ways in each of these 4 categories. So that's what I'm going to talk about tonight, is how we're implementing these 4 different objectives. So for objective number 1, this is assessing those needs of tribal, state, private sector, and all the other ones out there, the private industry, the producers, the nurseries, and other partners, whoever else is partnered and wanting to work on parts of the strategy. And so with BLM, we decided to partner up with the tribes. And this is a really long, arduous process. There was a lot of learning from the federal agencies that needed to happen to make any of these projects a success. And so when I started here in 2011, I kept asking BLM, especially here. We have 7 tribes with tribal colleges in the state of Montana, and we are not engaging those tribal colleges in doing natural resource management. Why? That was my big question. Why are we not doing that? And so I had many fits and starts, didn't have very good success to begin with. And it was in 2017, Washington office, my counterpart, or my headquarters person, the lead, Peggy Alwell, she knew an individual who had been working with Indigenous people across the world through the oh yeah, no, I can't can't even remember the name of them. Oh, that's so horrible. The ecological restoration, Society for Ecological Restoration. I knew it'd come to me. And so we had a meeting with her, and her name is Christina Eisenberg, and she had been working with the Kainai up in Canada and had brought a lot of different ideas and information to us here at BLM to think about. And so working with Christina in 2017 into 2018, she was invited to give presentations about how she was working with the Canadian tribes to some of the tribes on the northern end of Montana, so up on the High Line. And so she invited us to come participate in those conversations, because we as BLM, and me specifically, was trying really hard to figure out how to develop these relationships. And so the Fort Belknap Grassland Partnership was the one that started first here in Montana for working with the tribes on specifically the National Native Seed Strategy goals of this capacity and needs between the federal agencies and the tribal lands. And I was focused much on the restoration needs. And then later on, the Confederated Salish Kootenai tribes and the Missoula Field Office, and then the Shoban tribes and our Dillon office all started having conversations. And so for the Fort Belknap project, this project takes on a huge aspect that many hadn't been thinking about or approaching on how to deal with it. But the base is environmental justice and tribal sovereignty. And seeds happen to be a very common need and passion between, like, especially people like me and BLM and people like the Native Plant Society. But the tribes have a very unique relationship with the world. They have learned how to have those strong relationships with the individual plants and animals on the landscape and the environment that we, from our point of view, we don't understand it in the way that they do. And so one of the things was to use this project to try to help educate BLM on how we need to think differently when it comes to those tribal values that they see with the public lands, because all of the public lands used to be tribal territories. And part of our trust responsibilities to the tribes is to manage the public lands to the benefit of the tribes. So the basis behind this Fort Belknap project is it's working to collaboratively to bring those Native American ecologists and those tribal members that know their cultural needs and their cultural work that they do with plants and animals, bringing that indigenous knowledge into the process and trying to figure out how can we implement some of that indigenous knowledge as we're doing Western science. So BLM, we have the Seeds of Success program, which I'll talk a little bit about more in a minute. And then we also have our assessment, inventory, and monitoring program. And that program helps us to evaluate land uses on public lands. And so my idea was, if we're going to be out collecting seeds on public lands, who better to teach us how to do it right than the tribes, because they have the understanding and relationship on how to collect the seeds appropriately and to be able to honor the culture that they have. And then if we're doing it from, from a federal land management standpoint, we should be monitoring how those population collections, those seed collections are affecting the populations. And so we married up an AIM plot with every one of our species collection sites that we had on BLM lands. And mostly we're talking, for us, it's our Havre and Malta field offices. So it's basically all of the public lands that surround the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation. The tribe did ask us to do some work on their lands also, because they have some areas that they wanted to restore that are within their Yellowstone bison pastures that they have. And so they were wanting help in figuring out how to do the restoration and getting those native seed material, or the native seeds and the plant materials available for them to do their restoration work also. And so originally we were just planning to work on public lands, but then the tribe specifically asked us to work on on the tribal lands also. And so what we like to tell people is we're trying to use the best Western science practices, indigenous knowledge, and social justice. So I believe it's over 75% of the employees or project people that work on this Fort Belknap project, they're Native Americans, and the bulk of them are Fort Belknap Indian community members. And so they're coming to us from Hayes, Lodgepole, and Harlem areas and agency. And so they're mostly young students, but we do have their ecologists from the the Department of Environmental Quality. Dennis Longknife Jr. He's the liaison for this project to the tribes. And so he brings to us the information that we need to know on how to work with the tribes and when to meet with who. And so this project's been going on in the field actively since 2019, and 2020 was like our first major field season, and it was COVID. And we amazingly got a lot of great work done, even during a time of a pandemic. The Salish Kootenai, or Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, they have an actual tribal nursery that is on tribal lands, and they grow a lot of native plants, but their biggest thing is they grow a lot of whitebark pine and a lot of pine trees for forested restoration, because a lot of their reservation has forested lands. And over the years, BLM, Forest Service, and other entities have actually contracted with them to grow out tree material for restoration projects. And so in working with the field office staff there, trying to figure out how to better integrate the restoration work that the Missoula field office is doing, and the fact that they acquired Plum Creek timber lands when Plum Creek Plum Creek Timber Company went out of business. They acquired a large chunk, I can't remember the acreage, but it's a few thousand acres. And all of that used to be historic, tribal territories. And as the Missoula field office started communicating with the Salish Kootenai, they learned that some of those areas, the elders remembered collecting camas and when they were young, and they hadn't seen camas in a lot of those areas for a long time, and it was mostly due to the activities that were happening. And so once BLM acquired that land, we actually acquired it under what's called the I didn't write it down. RTLT, Reserved Tribal Lands, Reserved Treaty Tribal. I can't remember. Anyway, this is a program in BLM that as we acquire public land, or as we acquire lands that then become public, we set them aside if they are within historic reservation or historic tribal boundaries, and we try to put tribal interests first on how we manage for those. And so the Missoula field office has been working very closely with the tribal council and the tribal Department of Forestry and the tribal nursery to build native plant materials for these restoration projects. So they've been collecting camas seed on both BLM lands, and then some of these lands that after the timber and the activities came off, we actually saw camas come back in some of those areas. And so they've identified, along with the tribes, the areas they want to collect the seed, and then now the tribal nursery is growing that seed out. They're also working on white bark pine for blister rust resistant white bark pine for forested restoration on both tribal and BLM lands. And then the other part of what the tribal nursery is doing for us is, as we make seed collections within our field offices and we have ideas of what we want to do with them, we can store that seed in appropriate seed storage areas that the tribe, we basically rent space in the tribal coolers, and they curate and maintain that seed until it's needed or it gets used for a grow out project. And so I think it's like these two middle shelves are all the seed at that time that they had for our Missoula and Dillon field offices. And then, speaking of Dillon, I think it's been 3 years ago now, our Dillon field office special status person, and she's been doing Seeds of Success. Her name is Kelly Savage. She has done more Seeds of Success collections on BLM lands than any other office in the state of Montana, Dakotas. So she has, I believe, 87 seed ascensions that are collected. And as she was going around, she started identifying these really amazing populations of bitterroot. And she was asking me, how do we do this? Should we be collecting the seed? If we do, should we be doing grow out and all this? And so I basically advised her to talk with the tribes that were from those areas. And Shoshone-Bannock tribes down in Fort Hall, they had a really long conversation and said we would be very interested in helping collect seed and potentially propagating it, because they also have a nursery system at their high school, and they have grown plants out for BLM. And then the other plant that they found some really good populations was Yampa. And then there are some small camas populations that they're looking at working with the Shoban for propagation. So now I'm going to move on to some of our other partnerships. And these are partnerships that we are building to help build the seed supply and helping to make sure that when we need seed, that there's going to be seed available when it's needed, and that it's genetically appropriate seed. And so that we are only using seed from the same habitat and ecoregional criteria. So same precip zones, winter freezing temperature average, and somewhat soil types also. And so the two partners that we have working on this work are our Special K Ranch partnership and the Montana Department of Natural Resources, their conservation seedling nursery. So out at Special K Ranch, we started this partnership. BLM started this partnership in 2006. That was about almost 5 years before I got here. And when I came into this job, we were finishing up our first 5-year agreement with them. And at the time, they were growing sagebrush seedlings. They were growing anywhere from 20 to 30 sagebrush seedlings a year for, primarily at the time, it was oil and gas pipeline restoration over in eastern Montana. So a lot of the Bakken oil field pipelines were starting to come into that area. And so they were trying to do the sagebrush restoration in sage-grouse habitat with those oil pipelines. And they only had this little like 10 by 10 foot area where they had grown a few native seeds just to see if they could get things to grow. And my biggest question to them was, how can I get acreage under production? Because we need lots of seed. We don't need just a 10-foot little area. We need acres of seed, and we need to figure out what plants we can grow. And so with Special K, they are a working and residential ranch for mentally disabled adults. And so their workforce is very unique. We kind of tease sometimes because many of their ranchers that they have out there have like severe OCD, and we can use that in a sense to focus them on a single task. And so like if we need weeds pulled and we show them what weeds we want pulled, they'll just crawl on the ground all day long and pull weeds, and they love it. I mean, they're so excited when they see how much work they've done. Or sometimes a lot of the forb species that we're looking at growing out at the ranch are ones that are harder for commercial industry to harvest. They have to be hand harvested. There's very few seeds per plant, but there's some of the critical sage-grouse forbs and the components that we need for restoration work out on the prairie. And so if we show them what the seed pod looks like and what the seeds look like, they'll work all day long just to collect those individual pods by hand. And they love that kind of work. And so having this unique partnership with them gives us some advantages over the work that we do with more the large commercial industry. So this year, I'm happy to say that we're finally, after almost 20 years of working with them, we're going to be able to bring this full circle. So these pictures are from December of 23, where we have residents out there helping us collect sagebrush seed. And the seed that we collected out there, we propagated this year. All the seed came from just north of the Billings area. And some of it actually came down from the southern part near south of Bridger and south of Red Lodge, because we had that Robertson Draw fire in 2022. I believe that's the year it happened, and it burned a lot of priority sage-grouse habitat, and it was such a hot burn that there's no sagebrush left. And so we wanted to be able to start some small sagebrush islands of grown sagebrush that can help us get a kickstart in getting some of that seed bank back in place. And so the residents who are out there, we use these modified vacuums that are basically leaf blowers, but you reverse the mower so it sucks instead of blows, and you take out the little chopping blade that's in there. Sagebrush seed's pretty dang small, but we actually did see some damage from the blade when it spins to chop. So we took those blades out, and in a few hours, you can fill one of these bags of sagebrush seed. And it's crazy because doing hand collection, we'd maybe get 5 or 6 pounds in a whole day of hand collecting. And so now that they've grown out 30,000 sagebrush seedlings, most of those seedlings are going to be planted by a Mule Deer Foundation contract to do the seedling planting. But we're going to take a few hundred plants, and we're going to take an area on the Robertson Draw fire and allow the residents to go out there and plant those seedlings. And we're going to set up monitoring so that they can know that they went and collected the seed, They grew it out, they loved it for months, and then they get to package it up into boxes so that we can ship it onto site. And then they're going to actually put some in the ground, and hopefully we'll do some long-term monitoring with them so they can see how long it takes for those seedlings to be big and mature and how many of those survive. And so this project is just really unique, and it's very, very satisfying. And I forgot to point out in this picture here, this was 2019. We had a huge year for Horiaster, and almost every one of those, these are 35-gallon trash cans, almost every one of those trash cans is full of Horiaster seed. So it was pretty amazing the kind of harvest we can get off. And then this picture down here, this was our original garden setting, and this now, most of this has been torn up and redone. We originally planted the first plantings in 2013, and after about 5 or 6 years, many of those perennial forbs kind of start to dwindle in their age, and they stop producing at a high rate. And so we this summer have been back out to many of the original sites where we collected this wild seed to recollect so we can repropagate these. And then over in Missoula, Michael Butts, who I think is even on the call, I know some of the partners that I'm talking about are on the call tonight. He kind of approached a larger group of individuals, and you can see this original group of people that were at his meeting. And he starts presenting about the National Native Seed Strategy, and he says, I want to see this built for Montana. We need to figure out what we need to do here in Montana and who needs to participate. And Missoula, being a really active county for conservation, we're one of the primary partners saying, hey, we would love to help get this going because we have lots of needs for native seed in their parks and recs, restoration work, and a lot of their citizens also really want to know how to get a hold of native seed to do work on their private lands. And so we had this meeting with Michael and a group of about, I don't know, 35 or 40 people in the room. And some of us were like, this is awesome because this is what we've all been trying to do, especially like at the federal level. But it was great to see the energy coming down even to the lower level. And so I really commend Michael for bringing a huge group of people together. And even though it's kind of starting to focus just around Missoula and the Bitterroot Valley, it's actually made some good leaps and bounds. And we're really hoping that with one of my other projects that I'm going to talk about in a minute, we might have some possibility to expand some of their work over into eastern Montana. Don't know if that's going to happen, but we're going to hope. So the third objective that I've been working with partners to do is conducting these species-specific research projects. So South Dakota State University, their professor, their botany professor over there, Laura Perkins, has just been very, very focused on figuring out how do we get people to love native plants more. And she's done a lot of research over the years, and she's got a really large group of interested students that she works with. And so back in 2021, I was able to come up with some funding, and one of her students worked on determining germination needs for a lot of our prairie forb species that nobody had really done germination studies on yet, and we hadn't been using in production because we didn't really understand what we needed to do to get those plants those seeds to germinate and those plants to grow. And so from there, they've actually done some seed handling and storage, like having certain temperature regimes and keeping them at certain precip, and what happens when things don't get into storage soon enough, or they get taken out of storage and then put back into storage. So they did some work on trying to help us figure out, how do we need to treat this extremely precious resource of these native seeds. And then they also were looking at trying out different types of germination techniques to see which ones were most efficient for highest level of germination on a lot of those priority forbs that we worked on early on to figure out how do you break germination or break dormancy. And then the other big thing that South Dakota State's really been a huge partner in is they got together a huge organization of people to develop the Northern Great Plains native seed strategy. So again, similar to what Michael here in Montana did, a group of nonprofit federal growers, commercial industry, just bring all these people together and start talking about how do we build these native seeds for these regions that we haven't had a lot of commercial activity in yet. A lot of it's been focused in Utah and the Great Basin and the Southwest deserts. And then there are some focus back east also. And so being able to work with these partners has really helped me as the federal employee. Participating with these partners has helped me help show that BLM is participating in this and making some strides in getting somewhere on the national seed strategy objectives. And then the last one that I'm going to talk about under this, under the objectives here for the seed strategy, is that in 2023, the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed that gave money to a lot of the federal agencies to do landscape resiliency level projects. There's a huge focus on using native seed and native plant materials in this restoration work, and a focus of that material being that locally adapted genetic source that we're really focused on under the seed strategy. And so the burned area rehab pot of money that came to Department of Interior, they said, all right, we use a lot of this native seed when we have it available, but we don't always have it available. And we've got a pretty slim pool of species to pull from. So we're going to offer up money to DOI agencies to do more seed collection and get more seeds through the process to get it into commercial growers so that we can have lots and lots of poundage available as we do these restoration projects. And the National Park Service was the one that decided they were going to put in application. And as they started putting their application in, it had this little saying in there that said, top priority projects will be multiple DOI agency partnerships. They weren't interested in just giving more money to any individual DOI agency. It was an effort to try to make us all work together. So Katie Van Zant, she's actually out of Colorado, but she's the National Native Seed Coordinator and Restoration Ecologist for the Park Service. She deals mostly with the Western regional parks. She called me up and said, hey, I know you've been doing some work up there in Montana and the Dakotas. My area covers that too, and we're looking at putting one in for the Northern Great Plains. And so I was like, yeah, I'd love to do that. But I said, there's some people in Fish and Wildlife Service we should call too. And so I have some contacts in the refuge system, and one of them had been a former BLM employee that really understood what I was trying to do when they worked here in Montana, and had constantly been asking me since they moved down to Wyoming to work for the Park Service or for the Fish and Wildlife Service, how do I get a hold of some of this seed? We've got all this restoration work that we got to get going. And so the three of us representing the 3 DOI agencies helped put together a package, and we received funding to fund 3 Seeds of Success teams for the Northern Great Plains here across these 3 agencies. And then the Park Service also had money to focus on parks in North and South Dakota, and some of the Montana, like Glacier got a chunk of money too to do some of this work. And so this is kind of one of the ways that we are doing this internal communication, working together and implementing this across agencies. So we all came up with the plant list together. We focused really hard on prairie species because, of course, we're talking Northern Great Plains. And so here in Montana, I've been hosting the Billings team along with our new botanist for the Billings field office. We're getting him trained up to help us manage these teams as they come out. In Wyoming, it's the Siskiyou Wildlife Refuge. Their lead wildlife biologist is manning those teams. And in Colorado, they're kind of in the Grand Junction and Utah areas where they've been working, and Katie has been helping manage those teams. So we ended up getting the ACE group, which is the American Conservation Experience. They're part of Conservation Corps. And it was kind of a unique thing with them to actually put teams of people that were going to work together for an extended period of time. They usually do 1 or 2 week stints, and they kind of travel around and do work in a lot of different places. And so this was unique for them to be placing teams in 3 kind of centralized locations, and they basically come back to a home base for almost the whole summer. So this has been a learning experience across all of us, but it's been a really good experience. So this map here, so I know it's a little busy and a large area to look at, but all of these dots represent the green are historic Seeds of Success collections that have been made. If you've got the teal colored triangles, those were scouting locations. So they might be a brand new site, or it might be a site where we had a collection in the past that we were re-scouting to see if we could do a seed collection. And then all of these red dots are Seeds of Success collections that have been made for the Northern Great Plains here in 2025. The bulk of the everything south of the Missouri River here in central Montana, and then all of this stuff down here in this southwestern corner of Wyoming. And then I don't know why they're not showing up, but there were a few collections down here on this bottom skirt here that those are all being collected by these DOI teams. And then some of the stuff central Wyoming, and that is some BLM Wyoming teams. These teams over here in the Dakotas are Park Service teams. And then of course up here, Glacier. And so it's a really big effort. And I think my teams alone have collected 15 species, which may not seem like a lot, but when we're asking them for 20 pounds of wild collected Monarda, that's a lot of work. It's some of these plants, you have to go far and wide to get enough seed for one of these collections. And then this is just a more focused visual on where those 2024 collections have been made across the Northern Great Plains region. The whole grayed out area is that Northern Great Plains ecoregion. All right, and I'm going to try to hurry and get through this. Special status species. So I really wanted to do a little update because I know we've had some questions over the years on our special status list. And so right now, our current list we're going off of is our 2020 list that we published. And we had a total of 58 plant species on that list. 27 were from Montana, 12 from North Dakota, and 22 from South Dakota. And I know those don't add up to 58. It's because we've got a few species that overlap the states. So I am in the process of updating that list, and we have to have our list updated and published by the end of 25. So I'll be working a lot with the Heritage Program and anyone else that may have information to share about species of concern, and kind of a plug for the Montana Plant Conservation Strategy that just got published, a large partnership, but very much have to give credit to the Heritage Program and Andrea Pipp for pushing that through. After 6 years, we now have, I think it's 109 special status or species of conservation concern, a handful of habitats, and some very specific habitat types like aspens that are habitats of concern. And so all of that kind of information we're going to be pulling together to update our list. But very specifically, I wanted to talk a little bit about Physaria pachyphylla. So for those that don't know, I got to remember, I think it was late 2022, this species got petitioned by the Montana Native Plant Society and the Center for Biological Diversity. They petitioned Fish and Wildlife Service to list this species as a threatened or an endangered species. And part of that was because at the time when the listing happened, the populations that we knew of were somewhat scattered, but very isolated to certain habitat types. And a lot of the information was incidental or quick observation data. And so the observations were that the plant was found there. There wasn't necessarily a count or an area identified in how many acres was occupied and how many plants were in those areas. And so the largest known area at the time happened to be in the Pryor Mountain foothills. And we got an application for a gypsum mine exploration to happen in that site. And so as we went out with our preliminary information, our scoping documents, people were seeing that potentially if this gypsum mine moved forward into the future, we could be losing a really large population or a portion of the population of this Physaria pachyphylla. So that was one of the main reasons why the petition for listing came out. And so as being the majority landowner for that species here in Montana, but also Wyoming, BLM has some of the populations. I went together with the Wyoming BLM and we got the Wyoming and Montana Natural Heritage programs to help us do some inventory studies and to also evaluate risks and threats for the species. And so they've done 23 and 24 work, and I'll show you guys some of that information. Another thing that's come out of pachyphylla being a species of interest is that the Montana Moth Project had been working in the Pryor Mountains, and they knew what was going on with the Physaria, and they were really interested to see, you know, we're into moths, we're going to go see if moths maybe are playing a role for this species. I'll show you a picture and tell you a little bit more about kind of some preliminary work that they found with that. And then recently we had a training session and a bigger conversation with the Fish and Wildlife Service to help them gather the information they need for their species status assessment that will help them determine is the species warranted for listing or not. So the interim report that the Heritage Program and the Wyoming Natural Diversity Database did for us in 23, as you can see, all these little red areas were original population areas, but we now have polygons that delineate where within those observation areas the actual pachyphylla is occurring. So this Gyp Springs population here was the one where the application for the gypsum mine was made. So at this point in time, partially because the species is being reviewed for listing, and because the company had other areas that they could go extract gypsum that didn't have rare and sensitive species there, they've basically put this on hold, and they're kind of waiting to see what happens with the pachyphylla to determine if they want to continue with the thought of going in for exploration and potentially harvesting that gypsum, or if they're gonna just let it go. And so that's still an ongoing question mark. We don't know where that gypsum mine's gonna go in the future, but I know a lot of the work that that we've been doing, they've been keeping a close eye on, the company has, and they're interested in finding out, because they seem to be concerned for the species and seem to want to do the best for the species. And so we'll see how that comes, but that is going to play a part in the threats and the potential future threats. So I know that one of the populations, I want to say maybe it was both of these sites, were thought to be pachyphylla and turned out to be spatulata, because that's a really close look-alike and it's really hard to determine. And one spot that was on the might have been this guy right here, that's within the Bighorn Canyon Recreation Area, the National Park Service area, it turned out to not be pachyphylla either, but I think the rest of these are pachyphylla that were within that. And then all of these areas are pachyphylla, And then this little site up here that some BLM employees doing some monitoring thought they found pachyphylla. Andrea and her helper, I can't think of her name right now. They went up there and they verified that it is spatulated, it is not pachyphylla up at that site. So basically all of these red areas are where we have the concentration of the pachyphylla, and demijohn flats also. And then for the moth information, what the Montana Moth Project observed was when they found a moth that was interacting with pachyphylla, they did some swabbing and they sent the pollen swabs off to Canada with the, they've got the Library of Life up there that does the DNA and genetic work for a lot of species. And they were able to determine that that much of the pollen on 4 species of moths that they collected were heavily pachyphylla pollen. They had other species on them too, but it seemed like they seemed to have a lot more pachyphylla pollen on them than anything else. And so this has brought up the question, are potentially night pollinating moths playing a bigger role for this species than maybe we even know? And so we've got some planned work with the Montana Moth Project to help them do some more intense monitoring on this and possibly help us figure this out. But this spatulatus, I think, this species, I think there's 3 in this genus and 1 other genus of moth that they found that were heavily interacting with pachyphylla. So it's kind of an interesting thought that we may have some very unique pollinator interactions happening for that species, which then will also give us more information about its survival. And then I just wanted to throw this photo here so that people kind of understood what the habitat type is. So these like lighter colored ridges up here are where you primarily find the pachyphylla, but sometimes you'll find them in these little red soils too. And so it's a lot of times you're talking about these top ridges, but then every once in a while we don't know if it's just they've washed downhill or what over, over decades and decades. But there are pockets of them kind of scattered throughout this habitat type. And so we took Fish and Wildlife Service out to this site and showed them what the habitat type was. We were able to find a few of the plants, but they were in really poor shape. And so we're going to be doing some more work and getting them out there when it's closer to time to actually identify the plant positively. And so I'm to the end of this. I am going to share this page with Alex to be able to send out to anybody that's interested. I've put some links here for the National Seed Strategy, the Seeds of Success program, the Standards for Ecological Restoration. That's the Society for Ecological Restoration's guidance on how to do native seed restoration. The National Academy of Science report that came out on the seed strategy. I've also got a link for the Montana Native Seed Network, Montana Moth Project, and the Physaria pachyphylla. And I do think there's a couple of links that I have in a couple of the slides too. So I'll be sharing all of that. And with that, I just want to say thank you. And that is my contact information. And I only left 6 minutes.
Thank you, Wendy. Well, I think we can actually spill over. We have the room until 9, but we won't stay that long. But thank you so much for that wonderful and thorough overview of what you've been working on. Super interesting. We didn't get a lot of participation in the chat in terms of entering questions, but I would encourage people, if you want to enter any questions into the chat. We had a lot of compliments happening as you were speaking, so be sure to read through that at the end, Wendy.
Okay.
But I'll kick us off with a question I had. I was just so interested as you were talking about your collaboration with the tribes. I'm a hands-on in the soil kind of person, and I was just wondering ways in which you've learned about or learned to collect seeds with tribal entities that kind of differ from maybe the standard practice that you were utilizing before that partnership or
Okay.
those partnerships?
No, that's actually a really good question. So the Seeds of Success strategy, our protocols call for us to only collect up to 20% of the available seed in any season. And so we usually either collect seed only off one of every 5 plants, or we only try to take like a fifth of what's available on any one plant. And part of that, we want genetic diversity. So we won't want to just rob a couple of plants and have all the seed that we supposedly need. We want that spread out. But while we were working with the tribes, specifically up in Fort Belknap, we had like 3 years of class 3 and 4 drought, some of the worst drought we've ever had in Montana in that area. And the tribes were very concerned. They're like, we really don't like seeing that seed collected, and so we had to have these conversations with them. I said, well, the genetics that are expressed in drought years could be critical genetics to have in this broader seed mix, because maybe they're the ones that are going to perpetuate through climate change in the next couple hundred years or so. And so we had some really long talks, and the elders were guiding us to only collect 1% of the seed that was available on site. And so on a normal year, they were letting us collect around 5% of the seed on tribal lands, and then they asked only 1% of seed in those 3 years. And so, um, out of respect, we actually reciprocated that on public lands, and so we weren't collecting any more than 5 or 1%, depending on the year, on even the BLM lands. And so that is one big change that kind of came from those intimate conversations and hearing the tribes and their concerns. The other big thing that is very different is, before we do anything, um, we have song or ceremony, and it's a tribal elder or one of their singers that's with the group. We have a lot of tribal elders that participate with our groups. They're part of our teaching entity of this. And depending on who they are and the role that they play, they may have a song, a prayer, or they perform a smudge or tobacco or some kind of ceremony that they do. And so we actually do that when we do any collections on BLM lands too, because we are trying to respect those plant resources and the environmental resources out there by honoring the culture of the people that have those intimate relationships on the ground. And that land has had that relationship even after settlers came in and took it over. So those are just a couple quick examples of performing ceremony, but it's only tribal people that perform, but we as non-tribal, we participate as we're comfortable. Many of us have learned appropriate ways to give tobacco offerings and just be reverent when we're out there doing work.
Thank you for sharing that. We have a couple questions that came in. Jean, I believe, asked, how can one participate in documenting occurrences of sensitive and or threatened species?
Will you read that first part again?
Yes. How can one participate in documenting occurrences of sensitive and or threatened species?
So if you don't know about the Citizen Botany Program, you need to get a hold of Andrea and the Montana Native Plant Society that are running that program. Many of us federal agencies are participating in that. So there's a training session that Andrea puts on that, depending on the species that you're wanting to help identify and revisit populations, you get species specific identification training, and then you also learn how to fill out the observation forms and the information that we look for when we do a reobservation. So that is one need that we're trying to build that capacity up. I think Andrea is planning to have a report on the last couple of years of work. I think maybe by the end of this year, have a report out to the Native Plant Society, and then those of us partners that helped to fund the first couple of years. And so, yeah, if you really want to participate and you want to do it in a way that helps gather information, the Citizen Botany Program is a really cool thing that they've gotten going. And then the other thing is anyone can go on to the Montana Natural Heritage Program and look at the observation data sheets and protocols, and they have some of those available as like Survey 123 on a phone or a tablet if you're familiar with that kind of stuff. If not, you can do paper copies, and if you happen to find a population that you're not even aware if anybody else knows about it, you can fill out those observation forms, send them in, and Andrea looks them over. You may get a couple phone calls from her being like, okay, where exactly was this habitat type? So that she gets all the right information. But yeah, you can participate through the Montana Natural Heritage Program. Or if you're on federal lands, contact your local federal land management office and say, hey, I think I found a population of whatever, and work it out, because most of us are trying to get citizen botany going, and so that could be an easy way to connect with a local federal land manager or state agency land manager that wants to participate in that.
We have another question here from Laura. In addition to seed, do you collect other kinds of propagules?
Interesting they ask that question. So up until very recently, it's mostly just been seed. We have taken some, and not so much in the propagation side of what I've been doing, like with Special K, but I do believe that the seedling nursery, the conservation nursery, does this too. But certain plants like willows and dogwoods, you can take twig cuttings and you can get them rooted and growing, and so you can basically take clones of those individuals and get those going. And so we do that as a practice with a lot of our riparian restoration, but we just do it all on site. We go out early in the spring before all the sap runs, we cut, the stems of the size that we need. We usually put them in some water to help, and some growth hormones to help those roots get started. And then we just go and shove them in the ground and make sure they get into the water table so that they've got that water to get those roots growing. But so yeah, doing cuttings is one way that we have done propagation out on a lot of our land. But we're embarking on something this fall, hopefully in like the second week in November. Our Lewistown field office, they work on a lot of breaks country. So we've got the Charles M. Russell Wildlife Refuge that's, on the northern end of the Lewistown field office border, and also they border the Upper Missouri River Breaks National Monument. And so that breaks country as you're leading into the canyons that the two other groups manage. We've done a lot of inventory and noticed there's very, very little aspen left on the public lands that are not within either the refuge system or in the monument system. And so our Lewistown wildlife biologist, in an effort to try to figure out how do we preserve what little bit of aspen's left in the breaks country and get into propagation, is he's worked with the CMR, and they've identified a couple populations that a handful of people from my Special K project are going to be going up with me, we hope the second week in November, and we're going to do some root cuttings of aspens up there, bring them back to the ranch and start an orchard basically of those cuttings so that we can grow trees here in Columbus, Montana that can be cut in the future and then replanted up in the breaks country. So that's the only other type of propagule that we've ventured on yet, and that one will be, if anybody's got really good info on doing root cuttings, Michael, if you do, let me know. I've got a couple of things that we're looking into, but yeah, seeds are what I use most.
Beth offered a question, or a question, I suppose. Tell us a little bit about the challenges of large scale sagebrush restoration, it sounds like transplanting seedlings is necessary, and just spreading seeds into habitats doesn't work.
It's kind of a both that happens. So Robertson draw fire, I'll use an example. Um, so that burned around 30,000 acres on BLM. 8,000 of it is in primary sage-grouse habitat. And so we have, I think, around a 6,000 aerial seeding planned for December, I think it is this year. And so we're gonna, I think it's helicopter drop a bunch of sagebrush seeds out there. Um, One thing that just in experience working in the Great Basin, doing fire rehabs with aerial seedings, you're lucky if 1% of all that seed you drop actually, survives drought conditions and all that stuff to actually grow and create an adult plant in 10 to 15 years that starts seeding. The thing that we've found with seedlings is even though they may only be 1 year old when you put them in the ground, it's almost like they have 3 or 4 years ahead of a seed that gets dropped, and hopefully all the conditions are proper. Um, and so if you can get those seedlings in the ground and there's enough moisture, hopefully in the fall before you plant them, and then we get that snowpack and some spring melt and rain, and they get enough moisture that they can start getting those roots down deep enough before the hot weather in the coming year, we can have upwards of 70-80% survivability. Now, on the years that we don't get that moisture that we need, we can have like 5% survivability. And so it always seems a little bit like a crapshoot when it talks about sagebrush restoration, but it really depends on the goal that you've got for it. So that widespread seeding, we're just trying to hopefully get some kind of sagebrush back out within that 6,000 acres that we're going to aerial seed. But this clustering up of plants in smaller mosaic patterns on the landscape, we're basically trying to strategically place them where the wind patterns will blow that seed across the landscape over time. And some of the work that I'd seen in Idaho is you get about every 10 years, you get another broad swath of sagebrush that comes out. And so there's a spot across the Idaho National Laboratory out there near Arco, Idaho, that there's about 60 years worth of sagebrush, and you can almost see it on an aerial image by the 10-year bands of how that seed has spread across the landscape. And so kind of trying to use the natural system of spread by putting some concentrated populations of sagebrush in areas that we know they're going to do well. So this planting that we're going to be doing in November, we're most likely going to only be planting in deeper soils and in areas where there's a little more moisture capture. We're not going to try to put them on rocky hilltops and things like that, because if they do survive, it's going to be a lot less. And so we want to put as much energy into making them survive as we can.
It sounds like you're utilizing diversification in your methods.
Yep, kind of have to. You have to kind of look at what nature does and see how we can mock what nature does.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to offer up any last questions if anyone wants to enter into the chat, or if anyone wants to be really brave and unmute and ask a question themselves.
I did want to point out, I saw that Jen over in Missoula, she put in the correct terminology for me. So it's reserved treaty right land. So it's RTRL. I think I had the abbreviation wrong. So, but Jen's been really critical in our Salish Kootenai project over there, and she's been doing a lot of that relationship building and helping to figure out where on public lands we can do some of this restoration work. So I just wanted to make sure I pointed that out. So thanks, Jen.
Oh, and we've got, okay, so Jean, hopefully I'm saying your name right, Jean. Again, in regards to sagebrush, how or is it determined that sagebrush seedlings are coming, from seedlings versus the seed bank?
So I'm maybe not 100% understanding, but if the sagebrush is coming from planted seedlings, that means we've collected the seed, we've grown it in a nursery, and then we go out and put it back out on the ground. And so it's artificially planting it in an area that we expect sagebrush to be. When it comes from the seed bank, part of the problem when you have these really hot wildfires is it burns up the root system of the old sagebrush that would be our standing seed bank, and any seed that's in that soil, because sagebrush seed only needs to be in that top quarter inch of the soil. It just barely needs a dusting of soil for it to have enough to germinate. And since it's so high up in the soil profile, a wildfire will just kill all that seed very, very quickly. Even a lot of flash burns where you like say you've got a bunch of cheatgrass or just grass that's not even a really hot fire, you can lose quite a bit of your sagebrush seed in that seed bank because of the heat. And so where you do see like the natural regeneration is the cool thing, and I wrote a little article about this quite a few years ago, but so sagebrush, when they're naturally dropping their seed, they do it in the winter, and the best conditions are when you've already had some snow on the ground and it drops its seed like late November, early December usually. And so it puts that dense cover of that sagebrush seed out there, and then hopefully you get a little more snow. And so you get this little like sandwich of seed in between snow packs. And then in the springtime, as that snow slowly melts through, it gives just enough moisture in that soil for those seedlings. And I have seen sagebrush seedling roots grow inches a day. I mean, they can grow really, really fast if they're in the right conditions. And they can germinate really close to like 34, 35 degrees Fahrenheit. And so they take advantage of that winter moisture, and they're growing and establishing quite a bit earlier than what most people would think. And so if you're ever out and you see sagebrush that the snow has started to recede and you go on the leeward side, look, and you might even see a few little seedlings started. They don't drop very far from the plant, and so that's why it takes 10 or so years for those populations to spread big enough to then mature and then do it all over again.
Laura is asking, do you find that planting seedlings is more successful than seeding when they're competing with cheatgrass?
Yes and no. Yes, because if you have a heavy cheatgrass or annual grass duff or litter on the ground and that seed can't touch the soil, so sagebrush seed has to be on the soil surface, and then it has to have all those right moisture conditions. So if it's not touching the soil surface, it won't grow. So in a way, that's why after a wildfire, if you can get that seed on in that first winter, they do the best because there's very little veg competition. But we do have a couple of places where we have put sagebrush plugs in the ground in like pretty heavy cheatgrass or annual bromes. And it kind of really depends on how you got them planted and what your spring looked like. I always say that, that spring moisture is critical for any of these things to survive. But yeah, if we can get a good healthy seedling in the ground packed in just right, and you don't have that winter kill, they do fairly well. I've got a project that makes me think I need to go back up. It's been about 8 years ago that I think we planted, and we had a lot of cheatgrass in that site. Should go back up there and take some photos of how big those sagebrush are now. So I know I think on that project, and we didn't have good spring moisture the year after. I want to say we had about 50 or 55% survivability. But some of our planting techniques, and we were kind of investigating different ways to do it, they weren't working well. A lot of the sagebrush got buried too deep. We did a furrow in the wheels that roll over, and the soil was previously agricultured, and then it had been fallow for many years. And most of those didn't survive because they got buried too deep. And then if you've got planting crews that don't step those sagebrush in and pack out all of those air pockets, those little air pockets will freeze the root systems on them in the wintertime, and then they also die. And so you've got to have people that know what they're doing and paying enough attention when they put them in the ground. But the ones that got in the ground good were doing well at least 3 or 4 years ago when I saw them. So
Mm. A labor of love. Um, please address permit requirements for commercial seed collection on BLM and national or NFSF land, national.
I
Yeah.
think they're saying Forest Service lands there, maybe.
Okay.
National Forest Service forest lands, I guess.
Okay.
Maybe. So BLM and Forest Service have different permitting processes. And then Park Service also have very specific so there can be commercial collection national forest system lands. Okay, thank you. So with BLM, we haven't had any commercial seed collecting permits requested for Montana Dakotas yet. I dealt with them when I was in southern Idaho in the mid to late 2000s. But we do have a policy for the most part, as long as the area identified for the seed collection is not within a wilderness study area or area of critical environmental concern or some other sensitive area. Um, we just ask that the applicant comes in with a map showing where they want to collect it. I ask for, show me the picture of the plant that you think you're collecting seed from, because I have had lots of people say I'm collecting X and they end up collecting something totally different. And so I want to make sure that that commercial vendor is really collecting what they say they want to collect. And right now, like I said, we don't have any specific areas that anyone has asked for, but to do that commercial collection, we do charge a fee, but it's a very minor fee. It's usually like cents per pound for the collections. And some of that, we also have like some road maintenance fees and stuff that get charged on there, but like our minimum permit price is $10. And I issued a permit in Idaho that I think was $300. So we're not talking like break the bank kind of permit costs, but the idea behind the permitting system is to inform us as the public land managers what species are being sought after and where are they being collected so that we can manage over time. Utah's got this amazingly complex system because collections have been happening in the state of Utah for 40 or more years. And so they actually have like a township range or something along that only X commercial collector can collect in that township range, and they can only collect those 2 or 3 species that they've identified. No one else can get a permit for that area or for any of those species in that area. And so I would love to see it in Montana that's, that intense, but right now we just ask that you come in and you tell us where it is you want to collect and what you're collecting. And for the most part, as long as it's not within a protected area, we're going to be begging you to collect seed because we don't have a lot of commercial vendors. But to collect commercially, you do have to have a permit. And I did have one in Idaho where they actually spent a night in jail because they were collecting without a permit. They had a permit from Utah that was not for Idaho, and our law enforcement confiscated all the seed they'd collected and their trailer, and they didn't get it back. And so, I always tell everybody, if you want to do something on public lands, get a permit. They usually don't cost very much money, but they protect you from somebody not knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it. So, but yeah, I can't really speak to the Forest Service process. I know theirs is a little different, but they do have a process that they go through. And so, contact your local Forest Service office and ask them.
And do you have any take, Wendy, on how long the permitting process takes?
Most of the time you walk in here. We have addressed on the large scale for NEPA in our land use plans that we have identified that we will permit commercial seed collecting when it's not within those restricted areas. But for the most part, if it's not hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds of seed, then the NEPA should be pretty easy to do, and it could be just a few weeks. I have had some permits that we felt like we had enough coverage on the on the side of the Environmental Policy Act review that we have to do for actions, that we issued permits within, an hour. They came in and we just sat down and put the permit together. But that's where we already had some NEPA done. So that would be something, if there are vendors out there that want to start collecting on public lands, give me a shout. Tell me where it is you're looking and what you're looking to do, and I'll get on the NEPA, because once we have it in place, then the permit process is just having to get the paperwork put together and a permit.
So I guess a follow-up for that, a question I have is, you have really been taking care to not over harvest. When folks are going in to harvest commercially, is that is there a concern there? Is there an
Yeah.
expectation?
We generally don't allow more than 20% on an average year, but we can allow in a boom year where maybe we've had perfect moisture just before the growing season, and it just like there's seed everywhere for that certain species. In Idaho, we've allowed up to 50% seed collection when I was doing it over there. And so it's going to depend on the conditions and the local office and what that office what their concerns are for the amount of seed. But generally we only allow it to 20% collected, just like we do ourselves. So that's the other thing commercial vendors need to know is, if they need 150 pounds of seed, they're going to have to know how much acreage they really need to collect from to get that 150 pounds of seed. Because you got to collect a lot more wild collected if you want 150 pounds clean seed.
Absolutely. And Michael Butts mentioned earlier, I don't know if you saw this, Wendy, but he just made a note while you were speaking that eco-regional seed harvests are underway at the DNR Seed Nursery for the Montana Native Seed Network. So
Yep. He's been doing amazing to get those vendors out there on the ground. And he's been working with everybody that he's collecting on. And so, yeah, Michael's a good partner to work with.
great. Well, thank you once again for your generous Q&A time and for this awesome program. And yeah, I think it looks like we're wrapped up as far as questions go. So yeah, really appreciate your time, Wendy. Thanks so
Well,
much.
thank you to everybody for the comments. And yes, it's good to see some faces I know making comments like Alexa and some of my other counterparts. And the one in Lewistown that I'm going to have to look you up, and we're going to have some catching up conversation, sounds like. So
Awesome.
yeah, just feel free to drop me a line anytime. I usually am better at email than phone, but yeah, if you have questions, let me know.
Great. Thank you. All right.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.